Morgan Blake. Entry number 014. The Disappearing Town. Maps can show you where you are, but they can't always show you where you're going. What if I told you that some places aren't meant to be found, that no map can show you where they lie? What if I told you that certain places, even when they vanish from the world, can still trap the souls of those unlucky enough to stumble upon them? Stay with me until the end, and you'll see why I had no choice but to believe in the impossible. I'm Morgan Blake, and this is the story of the disappearing village. It began with rumors. Always rumors. In my line of work, I have heard countless tales, whispers of haunted mansions, forgotten cemeteries where time has stopped, and creatures that lurk in the shadows of reality. Most of these stories are dismissed as folklore, urban legends twisted over generations. But this was different. The name Harrowgrove found its way into the conversations of those who were not prone to fantasy. Hardened men, veterans of old battles with time-worn faces, shuddered when the name came up. It wasn't just another ghost story to them. It was something far worse. Harrowgrove wasn't marked on any map. That was the first peculiarity. No town records, no government archives, no census data. It was as if the village had been wiped from existence. Yet people talked about it, always in hushed voices, as though the very mention of it could summon its curse. I've spent years investigating the strange and unexplained, traveling to places that few others would dare. But no matter how many files I scoured or how many conversations I had with locals in dimly lit taverns, there was always a sense of something missing. The village seemed to evade definition, like a shadow slipping through your fingers. At first, I told myself that it was just a story, another eerie place for ghost hunters to chase in vain. But something gnawed at the edge of my consciousness. A feeling. A pull that I couldn't ignore. So, I decided to do what I always do, find the truth, even if it meant walking into a nightmare. Chapter 2, The Map That Led Nowhere. I am meticulous when it comes to research. Before every expedition, I dive into maps, archives, and historical records. Harrowgrove was a strange anomaly. No official documents, no maps that acknowledged its existence. I had thought that perhaps this was a tale blown out of proportion, some small, forgotten hamlet swallowed by nature and time. But the deeper I dug, the more ominous it became. Old cartographers' notes hinted at a place that should be there but wasn't. They spoke of roads that led nowhere, and one journal in particular, a worn, crumbling diary from the 1920s, mentioned a village swallowed by mist. The author of the journal was a woman named Abigail Fairfax, a schoolteacher who had worked in the area. Her descriptions began innocuously enough, detailing her arrival in the village, her first impressions of the townsfolk, but there was something beneath the surface of her writing. By the time she reached the last few entries, the tone had shifted dramatically. She wrote of sleepless nights, of waking to see the mist roll in from the fields, thick and impenetrable. Abigail claimed that she heard voices, not of the living, but of something much older, something that resided beneath the village. In her final entry, her handwriting had become frantic, barely legible. She wrote that the village was trapped, bound to a curse so old that no one remembered the origins. Her last words, "Harrowgrove will take me," were scrawled messily across the page. I couldn't shake the feeling that this was no ordinary village, no ordinary story. So, I gathered my things. A new journal, my old, reliable camera, and provisions. The usual. This time, however, I also packed a compass and multiple maps, as if I were venturing into a place where reality itself might shift. The drive toward where Harrowgrove was supposed to be led me into the deep countryside. The land stretched out endlessly, a rolling expanse of fields and woods, but there was a kind of stillness that settled over it, like the air itself was holding its breath. As the miles stretched on, the road became more narrow, less defined, until it was little more than a dirt path snaking through a dense forest. For hours, nothing changed. The trees seemed frozen in place, their branches twisting upward into the dimming sky like skeletal fingers. My mind wandered, going over everything I had read about Harrowgrove, trying to make sense of the conflicting accounts. Some claimed that the village was lost to a natural disaster, perhaps a flood or a storm that wiped it off the map. Others hinted at something far darker, a curse that bound the village to a loop, eternally reappearing and vanishing with the mist. But none of that prepared me for what lay ahead. The mist began rolling in around twilight, as it always seemed to do in the stories. At first, it was a gentle fog that hugged the earth, but soon it thickened, swirling and rising until the road before me was obscured entirely. I slowed the car, peering through the haze, but visibility was reduced to mere feet. It was then that I saw her, a woman standing by the side of the road, almost blending into the mist. She was old, with long, silver hair cascading over her shoulders. Her face was gaunt, weathered, and there was something about the way she stood there, motionless, that sent a chill down my spine. I pulled over and stepped out of the car, my breath visible in the cold air. The woman didn't move as I approached her. Her eyes were fixed on the mist, unblinking, as though she were waiting for something or someone. I stopped a few feet away from her, and for a long moment, neither of us moved. She didn't acknowledge me, but I could sense that she was aware of my presence. There was a heaviness in the air between us, an unspoken tension that made my skin crawl. Finally, she turned her head ever so slightly, just enough for me to see her eyes. They were pale, almost milky, like she had seen too much, far beyond what any human should have to endure. She began to walk away, fading into the mist as though she had never been there at all. By the time the mist began to clear, the village had appeared. It didn't come all at once, but rather piece by piece, like a painting coming into focus as the fog dissipated. I stood there for a long moment, just staring, unsure of whether to believe my eyes. Harrowgrove. The village looked old, far older than I had imagined. Stone cottages lined the narrow streets, their roofs sloped with age, their windows dark and empty. The buildings leaned inward slightly, as though the weight of time had pressed down upon them for too long. And yet, there were signs of life. Thin columns of smoke rose from the chimneys, and the faint smell of burning wood drifted through the air. The streets, however, were empty. No movement, no sound. Just the village itself, standing there in the stillness as if waiting for me. As I ventured deeper into Harrowgrove, a strange sensation settled over me. The air here was different, heavier, as though I were walking through water instead of air. It clung to me, pulling me deeper into the village, urging me to explore. But there was something else too, a low hum, almost imperceptible, like the faintest whisper of voices carried on the wind. It wasn't clear, not at first, but the further I went, the more I could hear them. Not words, exactly, but more like an echo of something ancient, something forgotten. I came across a small shop, its windows covered in grime. The door was ajar, swaying gently in the breeze. I hesitated for a moment before stepping inside. The interior was dimly lit by the faint glow of the outside light filtering through the cracks in the walls. The shelves were lined with objects that looked as though they hadn't been touched in decades, old bottles, faded cloth, trinkets covered in dust. But there was something off about the arrangement, something that didn't sit right. Everything was too still, too perfect, as if frozen in time. As I moved through the village, it became clear that I wasn't the only one who had been drawn here. There were others, people like me, wandering through the streets, their eyes glazed over, their movements slow and methodical. They didn't seem to notice me, or each other for that matter. They moved with a purpose, but it was a purpose I couldn't understand. They were like ghosts, trapped in a routine that no longer made sense. I watched them from a distance, careful not to get too close. There was something unsettling about the way they moved, as if they were being guided by an unseen force. I wondered if they had been here for hours, days, or even years. How long had they been wandering these streets, and why hadn't they left? I tried to call out to one of them, a man in his 40s with a tired face, but my voice seemed to vanish into the mist before it reached him. He didn't turn. He just kept walking, his footsteps soft and measured. It wasn't just the atmosphere of the village that felt oppressive, it was the pull, the undeniable sensation that I was walking into something I couldn't escape. The thought of turning back crossed my mind more than once, but every time I glanced toward the way I came, it felt as though the village had expanded. The mist was thicker there, the path back more obscure, as if the village itself was shifting to keep me in. As the hours ticked by, I couldn't tell whether time was moving forward or if I was stuck in some strange loop. My watch had stopped working as soon as I crossed into Harrowgrove, the hands frozen at 6:17 p.m. I had no reference for how long I had been walking or how much time had passed since I last saw the car. The mist thickened with each passing minute, blurring the world around me, transforming the village into a maze of stone and shadow. The thought of being lost here, wandering forever like those hollow-eyed figures, gnawed at me. And then there was the growing sense that something was watching me. Not just the village itself, but something within it. I could feel it, just out of sight, lurking in the mist, observing my every move. I wasn't alone in Harrowgrove, and whatever else was here was ancient, older than the village and its curse. Something powerful. As I wandered deeper into the village, my mind kept returning to the accounts I'd read in the diaries and letters about Harrowgrove, especially the bits I had found most cryptic. There had been brief mentions of rituals, strange practices that the villagers had conducted in secret. Abigail Fairfax's journal had referenced a dark heart to the village, though she hadn't elaborated. What kind of rituals had they performed? And why? I passed by what looked like an old town hall. The door was missing, and the windows had long since shattered, but something compelled me to step inside. The floorboards creaked under my weight, and the air smelled of rot and mildew. There were no remnants of chairs or tables, only an empty hall with remnants of a mural that stretched across the far wall, half hidden beneath layers of dirt and decay. I wiped some of the grime away with my sleeve, revealing a series of figures painted in dark, muted colors. It took me a moment to recognize what I was seeing. The figures were villagers, just like the ones I had seen wandering the streets, gathered in a circle around a central figure that was shrouded in black. Their faces were distorted, not in a way that suggested artistic failure, but in a way that made it seem like the painter had been trying to capture a transformation. They weren't just villagers, they were becoming something else. Something monstrous. The longer I stared, the more it felt as though the figures were moving, writhing under my gaze. There was an inscription beneath the mural, partially obscured by debris, but I could just make out the words, "To protect, we must sacrifice." It hit me then. The villagers hadn't performed these rituals to curse themselves. They had done it to ward off something worse. But what? And what had gone wrong? I left the town hall with a growing sense of dread. The mist had thickened again, so much so that I could barely see my hand in front of my face. The whispers in the air grew louder, more insistent, though I still couldn't make out what they were saying. It was like a chorus of voices just beyond the veil of reality, calling me deeper into the village, urging me to uncover the truth. I kept walking, unsure of where I was headed, trusting some primal instinct to guide me. The streets began to narrow, the buildings closing in, their stone facades crumbling, the windows empty and dark. I could feel something beneath my feet, a vibration, like the slow, rhythmic pulse of a heartbeat. It wasn't coming from the village itself but from somewhere below. The earth felt alive, shifting underfoot as though something ancient was stirring beneath the ground. Suddenly, the path before me opened up into a wide courtyard. At the center was a well, old and cracked, its stones weathered by time. The mist swirled around it, thicker here than anywhere else in the village, and I could feel a presence radiating from it. This, I realized, was the heart of Harrowgrove. The epicenter of whatever dark force had taken root here. The well seemed to call to me, beckoning me closer. My feet moved of their own accord, bringing me to the edge of the stone lip. I peered down into the darkness, but it was so deep I couldn't see the bottom. The hum beneath my feet grew stronger, more insistent, and I realized that the whispers I had been hearing all along were coming from within the well. There was something down there. Something alive. It was then that I realized Harrowgrove wasn't just a village lost to time. It was a prison. The villagers weren't victims of some tragic mistake, they had made a deliberate choice. They had bound themselves to the village, sacrificing their freedom, their lives, to keep something contained. The rituals they had performed were a kind of lock, a way to keep the darkness at bay. But over time, the lock had weakened, and now the village was slipping in and out of existence, caught between worlds. The figures I had seen wandering the streets, they weren't ghosts. They were the remnants of those who had made the sacrifice, cursed to remain here for eternity, bound to the village and the thing beneath it. And now, I was part of it too. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Harrowgrove wasn't trying to keep me out, it was trying to pull me in, to make me one of the bound. That's why the village reappeared when the mist rolled in, why it drew people in like a trap. It needed fresh blood, new sacrifices, to sustain the rituals and keep the ancient force below contained. But it wasn't enough. The force was growing stronger, pushing against the boundaries of its prison. And when it broke free, when the last of the bound were gone, it would consume everything. I stood there, staring down into the well, trying to make sense of what I had uncovered. The whispers had grown louder, almost deafening now, and I could feel the presence below reaching out, trying to pull me in. I took a step back, but the ground beneath me felt unstable, like the earth itself was shifting. The mist was swirling faster now, thickening around the well, and I could feel something rising from the depths. I wasn't alone. I could sense it, hovering just beyond my field of vision. I turned slowly, half expecting to see one of the villagers standing behind me, but what I saw was far worse. It was a shadow at first, barely distinguishable from the mist. But as it moved closer, I could see its form, a towering figure, twisted and unnatural, its body shifting and contorting as it moved. Its eyes, if they could even be called eyes, were nothing more than black voids, empty and hungry. It didn't speak, but I could hear its voice inside my head, a low, guttural sound that sent a wave of nausea through me. It was the thing beneath the well, the ancient force that the villagers had bound themselves to contain. And now, it was free. I don't know how long I stood there, paralyzed by fear. Time seemed to stretch and warp, bending around me like the mist. The figure circled me, its presence overwhelming, and I could feel its hunger, its desire to escape. But it didn't touch me. Not yet. It was waiting for something, for me to make a choice. I understood then what had to be done. The villagers had made their sacrifice long ago, binding themselves to Harrowgrove to keep the darkness contained. But their time was ending. The curse needed new blood, a new soul to take on the burden. If I left the village now, the creature would follow. It would break free of its prison and spread its corruption across the land. But if I stayed, if I became the next bound, I could keep it contained. For a time. It was the ultimate trap. The village didn't just draw in the curious and the lost, it drew in those who could make the sacrifice. Those who, like me, couldn't turn their back on the responsibility, no matter how terrible. I stood at the edge of the well, the creature looming behind me, and I knew there was only one way this could end. Harrowgrove would take me, just as it had taken the others. I would become one of the bound, cursed to walk the streets for eternity, my soul tied to the village and the darkness it held at bay. The thought terrified me. But the alternative, letting the creature free, was worse. I don't remember the exact moment it happened. One moment, I was standing at the edge of the well, the creature at my back, and the next, I was no longer myself. My thoughts, my memories, everything that made me was slipping away, dissolving into the mist. The village shifted around me, warping and twisting, but I could no longer tell if it was real or if I had become part of it. Time no longer mattered. I was Harrowgrove. Or perhaps Harrowgrove was me. The distinction between the village and myself had dissolved. I no longer felt like a separate entity, rather, I was woven into the very fabric of the place. My memories faded in and out, pieces of my past life slipping through my grasp as the boundaries of time unraveled. I couldn't tell how long I had been standing at the edge of that well, minutes, hours, days. There was no longer any sense of time in Harrowgrove. I was caught in a liminal space, a prison outside of the world's natural order. And yet, there was a part of me that remained painfully aware of what had happened. The village had taken me, just as it had taken countless others before me. The mist seemed to thicken around me, enveloping everything. The village itself began to blur, its edges softening, as if it were dissolving back into the ether from which it had come. I could feel the presence of the other bound ones, the villagers who had made the same choice long ago. I could sense their thoughts, their emotions. They were no longer individuals, no longer people with lives or histories. They were part of the village now, just as I was. We were all tied together, connected by the same ancient force that we had sworn to contain. I tried to remember who I had been, Morgan Blake, the investigator, the men who had come here seeking answers. But the name felt hollow now, a mere echo of a life that no longer existed. I was becoming something else, something less than human. The weight of the curse settled over me, heavy and inescapable. This was my fate. Days, months, perhaps even years, passed in a blur. Time, in this place, lost all meaning. I wandered the streets of Harrowgrove, just as the other bound ones did, my mind caught in a loop. Sometimes, I caught glimpses of the past, fragments of memories from before the village had been cursed. I saw the villagers as they had once been, ordinary people going about their daily lives, unaware of the horror that awaited them. I saw them gather in the church, performing the rituals that would ultimately trap them here. The rituals had been meant to protect the village, to shield it from some unseen force that threatened to consume it. But they had miscalculated. Instead of protecting the village, they had opened a door to something far worse. The thing that had lurked beneath the well had been waiting for a way in, and the rituals had provided it with just that. The villagers had unknowingly bound themselves to the creature, and in doing so, they had trapped the village in an endless cycle. I had become one of them. My soul was tied to Harrowgrove now, just as theirs were. And yet, there was a small part of me that resisted, a part of me that still remembered what it felt like to be free. I wandered the streets, searching for a way out, but I knew deep down that there was none. The village had claimed me, and it would never let me go. Over time, more people came. They were drawn to the village just as I had been, their curiosity leading them into the trap. I watched as they stumbled through the mist, their faces filled with the same confusion and fear I had felt when I first arrived. Some of them were like me, investigators, researchers, people searching for answers. Others were simply lost, drawn to Harrowgrove by some unseen force. At first, I tried to warn them. I tried to reach out, to tell them to turn back before it was too late. But they never heard me. My voice, like everything else in this place, was swallowed by the mist. I watched as they walked deeper into the village, unaware of the fate that awaited them. Some of them would stay, becoming new bound ones, their souls added to the countless others who had come before. Others would manage to escape, at least temporarily, but they would never truly be free. The village would always find a way to pull them back. There was one man who reminded me of myself, young, determined, eager to uncover the secrets of the village. I watched him as he explored, his movements cautious yet deliberate. He was meticulous, just as I had been, taking notes, sketching the buildings, trying to make sense of the place. I wanted to reach out to him, to warn him of the trap he was walking into, but I knew it was futile. Harrowgrove had already claimed him the moment he stepped into the mist. He just didn't know it yet. As the years stretched on, I began to sense a shift in the village. The presence beneath the well, the ancient force that had been bound here, was growing stronger. I could feel it pushing against the boundaries of its prison, testing the limits of the curse that held it in place. The rituals that the villagers had performed so long ago were weakening, and the CRE. I wasn't the only one who felt it. The other bound ones were restless, their movements more erratic, their thoughts more fragmented. The village itself seemed to tremble, the buildings creaking and groaning as though they were struggling to hold together. The mist was thicker now, denser, swirling around the well like a living thing. I knew what was coming. The creature was preparing to break free. There was nothing we could do to stop it. The rituals that had once held it in place were too old, too weak. The villagers had made their sacrifice, and I had made mine, but it wasn't enough. The creature had been waiting, biding its time, and now its moment had come. I stood at the edge of the well, staring down into the darkness. The whispers were louder now, almost deafening, and I could feel the presence rising from the depths. It was angry, vengeful. It wanted out. I could feel it tightening around me, around the other bound ones. The village was unraveling. Whatever fragile balance had been holding this cursed place together was breaking, and it was pulling us all deeper into the abyss. In the distance, I saw figures moving through the mist, newcomers. People had found their way to Harrowgrove once again, drawn by the same invisible force that had pulled me here. But this time, something was different. The village wasn't just drawing them in, it was consuming them. I felt the pull, that inevitable force that had held me captive for so long, but something else stirred within me. A memory of who I had been, the person I had lost along the way. Morgan Blake, the investigator, the skeptic, the man who had once sought the truth no matter the cost. I had accepted my fate, resigned myself to this cursed existence, but something was waking within me. The creature may have claimed my body, my soul, but it hadn't taken everything. I stepped toward the newcomers, pushing through the mist. They were close, too close. I could see their faces, their wide eyes filled with fear and confusion. I wanted to help them, to stop them from making the same mistake I had made, but there was no time. The village was collapsing in on itself, and the creature was moments away from breaking free. With the last vestiges of my strength, I willed myself forward, reaching out toward the closest figure. The mist swirled around me, growing thicker with every step, but I could feel something breaking loose within me, something ancient and primal. The creature's hold on me was slipping. And then, for the briefest moment, I was free. I don't know what happened next. The mist closed in around me, blinding me to the world beyond. The last thing I remember is the sound of the well cracking, a deep, thunderous rumble as the creature began to rise. And then, nothing. I don't know how long I've been gone. Days. Weeks. Years. Time has no meaning here anymore. All I know is that I'm still here, wandering the empty streets of Harrowgrove, just as I always have. The village remains, but it's different now. The mist is thicker, the air heavier, and the presence beneath the well is stronger than ever. It's still bound, for now, but I can feel it waiting. It knows that its time is coming, and when it does, there will be no stopping it. Newcomers still come, drawn by the same curiosity that brought me here so long ago. I watch them from the shadows, knowing that there's nothing I can do to save them. Harrowgrove will claim them, just as it claimed me. And so the cycle continues, endlessly repeating, with no end in sight. The village that wasn't meant to exist remains, hidden in the mist, waiting for the next soul to stumble upon it. Because some places aren't meant to be found. And once you've found them, they never let you go. Maps can show you where you are, but they can't always show you where you're going. And some roads lead to places best left forgotten. Morgan Blake. End of entry.